We brought in one of the people I look up to the most, to be honest with you, in the association space. I've learned just a tremendous amount from this woman, and she is an all-around badass. So hopefully you have your headphones in, because that is what Peggy is. There's no other word for it. So we're really excited to start bringing you guys more content from just around the association vertical. And if you have Googled education on chapter leaders or best practices or volunteer succession, which we're talking about today, you have heard of Ms. Peggy Hoffman here. So Peggy, welcome to, I can't believe it's taken us this long, but your first ever Bill Highway webinar. How's it going today?
It is going excellent. I'm glad to be here, especially to talk about something that is very much on my mind right now, as with my own chapters, we're getting into that season of putting together our slates.
Yes. Well, we're really excited too, and I'm going to hand this over to Peggy, and then I'm going to shut my mouth here. What I want to just let everybody know is this is a topic that we've been really hearing a lot from you. So I see a lot of names in the audience here, like Wesley and John, Aaron, Brian, and you guys have told us, hey, we need better best practices or new ideas on succession planning at the chapter level. So the more feedback you all give us, the better we can serve all of you. So thank you for that. And Peggy is here as a direct result. So without any further ado, Peggy, I'm going to hand it over to you. If everyone could just real quick, as Peggy starts talking, type into the chat, make sure that you let us know if you can hear her well and also see the screen, okay? Peggy, take it away.
Great. Okay, thanks. And welcome everybody to our conversation today about succession planning. Now, there are lots of sessions in which we have the opportunity to talk about how to, and lots of times we train our chapter leaders on succession planning, but this one is really for you guys. It's really for what is the role of the CRP in this whole process. And so I was a CRP for many, many years, and I still consider myself a CRP, but of course I've transitioned into what you might call your chapter exec director role, because that's in fact the role that I play with one of the chapters that we manage here out of the Mariner offices, and then we have two additional ones as well that my business partner, Peter Houstel, manages. So we understand the role of the CRP, we understand the role of the chapter exec, and we see them not as separate roles, but rather as really partnership, and that's what I want to talk about today as we get started. But let me get your fingers working here a little bit. What I'd love to do is put up a poll, and I'm going to put up the poll in just a moment, and I'm going to ask you to think, your average chapter board, all position filled, key positions filled, a few openings. How do your average chapter board go now? Let me go ahead, and you see it now. So go ahead and click all positions filled, key positions filled, a few openings. Go ahead. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and see what you guys are saying. Now, I know some of you may have 100 chapters, some of you may have 20 chapters, and so I'm asking you to think about this and respond to this in terms of sort of the average. Let's see. How are we doing on the voting? I don't see any votes in yet. Did I not launch the vote? Launch it? Okay, let's go ahead and just put that down. And why don't you throw in the chat if you guys are still getting used to all of this? Why don't you go ahead and throw it in the chat, and we'll continue along. The second one I wanted to do was to find out, what is your average chapter's leadership plan? I mean, succession plan. Would you say that most of your chapters have a fully functioning, we have the people to prove it? Is it that you find most of your folks are actually kind of on paper, but not doing much else, and or is it just catch as catch can? And again, if the poll is not working for you, just go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll capture your comments there. So just think for a moment, because part of what we want to do throughout today's conversation is to figure out how we can coach so that everybody says fully functioning. And if you know where you are, we can find the best places to apply the efforts. All right. So you've got in your mind what your questions are. You've got in your mind where you are. Let's talk about the things that get in the way of succession planning and how we as CRPs can make a difference. Let's identify some struggle points. Go ahead and type in while I chat a little bit here about the struggle points. Oftentimes, I think that what we hear most often is finding people, right? How do we find people? Like, we see people out there, but no one's raising their hand. I don't hear as often, but is clearly one of the issues, is how do I keep people? How do I avoid drop-offs? And what's really interesting, as I've seen in our own chapter here, is that we'll get people in, they'll take a small job, and then they drop off. So part of succession planning is understanding not only that we have to find folks, but it's also understanding, okay, how do we keep them? How do we make this process something that pulls people in, just as if you're fishing, right? You get them on the line, pulls them in, gets them deeply engaged, and then brings them up through the leadership of the chapter. Part of that is us beginning to understand what has changed and what has not changed about succession planning and the impact of the new volunteer model. So here's the interesting thing. We're still operating, and I think this is the top problem that we have both in chapters and as CRPs. We're still operating from the old model, right? We're still operating from this model that focuses on the top of the pyramid, that focuses on the titles. We're focused on what we need, not how do they, in air quotes, the folks that we're trying to get to lead, how do they want to engage? So every time that our chapter leaders go out and say, oh, we need chapter leaders, we have a president, we need a vice president, we need a this, we need a that, you are speaking from the chapter, you're not speaking from the member's viewpoint. So the first thing I think as CRPs that we need to do in terms of helping our chapters power up their succession planning is I think we have to flip the model and we have to flip the conversation. What do I mean by that? Well, we've got to look at the new model. Let's turn the focus upside down. Let's focus on how the individual wants to engage. Now, I know that you guys on the phone have heard this before. The question is, how do we make that actionable? How do we impact our chapter volunteer leaders of today to help them embrace this? Well, the first thing for us to do is that let's give them some information that they need in order to be able to turn this model upside down. Let's remind them that what we know about volunteers and what we know about what we've learned from research and what we hear in the field is that about 60% want small, ad hoc, episodic jobs, right? They want things that allow them to engage in smaller chunks of time, doing meaningful things, and give them a break when they need it, right? So it's really about getting them to think in terms of ad hoc, micro, episodic volunteering. Now, the reason why I like to bring this up, and this is what the value to us as coaches are, that 60% is a much larger funnel, right? That's the big funnel. If we can bring people into that side of this volunteer model, we're able to have more people that we can begin to engage, we can begin to develop, we can begin to see who are going to be the volunteers, who are going to be the members who are going to step up. So really understanding that and focusing there instead of on the top is going to allow us to build relationships. And after all, it's relationships that get people to raise their hand to be more deeply involved, right? So it also, though, ties into the fact that people who aren't volunteering tell us that it's about not having a short-term assignment. It's about a lack of virtual volunteering. So if we can get them to focus on this part of the funnel, this larger part of the funnel, then we can help them have a larger pool to pick from. So what does that mean? Well, part of what we have to do is it's the language that we speak, it's the behavior that we model. So let's encourage them and let's reward them and let's speak in terms of teams versus committees, micro-volunteering, episodic volunteering. Let's in our words and how we're rewarding them for what they're going to do, let's talk about the new model. So a great way of doing this is, you know how you do oftentimes there's an annual report and you ask for who's your president, who's your vice president, who's your treasurer, and you judge them based on the board. What if you said, how many people, how many members do you have that are doing small jobs? What if that was the measurement that you were looking for? Or maybe the measurement might be, how many small jobs do you have? So it's flipping that conversation, and it's encouraging them and rewarding them for doing that. When they start focusing on this broad pool of members who might be able to be engaged, they're just going to be able to have a different, easier conversation, because the conversation is going to be around, hey, why are you here? What do you want to get out of this? Wow, did you know that we've got this committee forming over here? If you want to, get to meet people, come on over here and do this. The classic case is in the PRSA Maryland chapter. We had a guy, and I was talking to him, and I knew he had leadership potential. And I was talking to him, and I said, well, what are you interested in? And he said, well, I really think that your awards program could be better. Okay, why don't we get you involved with that? He wound up moving through and helping us change the awards program, eventually moved on to the board and became president of the organization. So it was finding out, not starting with, oh, we need an awards chair, or, oh, we need a president, but it was, oh, what do you want to do? And honoring that and getting excited about that. So let's coach our folks in the field to think about this part of the equation. And let's help them further by being recruitment partners. Now, what I mean by recruitment partners, I mean, if you're going to be able to, embrace all of these extra people doing smaller jobs, can we set up portals for them? Can we create places where the member on the street can raise their hand for a small job? Can we create volunteer profiles where folks can declare their interest? Can we help our groups begin to set up, maybe it's a Google Doc, right? Maybe it's a really, really simple email solicitation that allows people just to raise their hand. How can we nationally set up portals? How can we help them set up portals? And of course, focusing on the new volunteers. But how can we also recruit for lighter volunteering? So let me give you a couple of examples, because I found some in some associations that I think are doing some really cool things around helping their local groups actually reach out and find these folks. The first one comes from ISACA. So this is a really cool customer service-based group. I love this page on their website, which Meet Your Neighbors, Volunteer at Your Local Chapter. I mean, it's right on their volunteering, it's in their volunteering section. It's one of their, one of the click-throughs. But here's somebody. It looks engaging. It's important for me to volunteer. Each time I do, I learn something new. Volunteer. The whole conversation, it elevates this idea of doing something locally. And this is on the national website, right? So this is a way of creating an exciting message that you can have nationally, and then they can mirror this page locally. So you're helping your chapters actually recruit volunteers to get involved. Here's another one, a little bit simpler, bolder headline, comes from ACFE. Love this. Volunteer in your local ACFE chapter. Again, this is under their volunteer section. It just says chapters are looking for members interested in enhancing their leadership skills, increasing their professional recognition. And then they have just some general duties to let people know. Now, they don't focus so much on the smaller jobs, but they do a good job of letting folks, as they're trolling through and learning about the organization and how to get involved, that there is a place for volunteering at the local level. I don't know if I have anybody on the call here from reps. I tend to point these folks out quite a bit because they're doing very exciting things. They're doing neat things on new model because they've shifted around their chapter model, which I think is really exciting. But what I really love is on their volunteer sequence, they have this wonderful continuum for volunteering. But what I love is under the examples, like if you see under champions, example, regional and local volunteer opportunities, event greeter, video testimony. I mean, they're just putting in that wonderful list of things, some smaller jobs. Under subject matter experts, present at chapter events, be a speaker or presenter. And then under thought leaders, and think about this, thought leaders, chapter executive committee, thought leader, chapter. You're making that wonderful connection that supports the member to realize the true value of being engaged at the local level. So there's lots of ways that we at the national level can help support this message. And when you're doing this, you're also telling your chapter leaders, hey, these are important kinds of volunteer roles. This is building that funnel. This is creating the farm team to bring people through. So we're creating the excitement that is so often missing, I believe, from our conversation around this. Okay. So remember I said that at the beginning that the two things I've heard are can't find people and can't keep people. Well, the number one reason why I think that people can't keep people, and this is big item number 2 I'd like to talk about for a moment, and that is the whole way that we make volunteering a drudge at the local level. The meetings, they just suck the air out of the room, and they suck the excitement out of the volunteer. So what we really need to do in coaching our chapters to power up their succession planning is we got to help them get away from this, and we got to help them build the excitement in volunteering at the local level. Now, on one side, what I'm talking about, it's not specific to the succession planning. We certainly can give tools, right? We can lighten the load for our chapter volunteers, and that's another whole conversation. In fact, at the CEX, the component exchange coming up in October, we're going to have a whole session on how do you create resources and supports for chapter leaders, which make the job easier. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about how do we get our volunteers at the chapter local level to make volunteering fun again? How do we coach them on creating dynamic meetings? How do we focus them on community, not plans? So I know that we know effective practice in association says that everybody should have a strategic plan or an annual plan, and we grade them on that. I'm saying, can we grade them on how they're building the community? Can we help them see the value of the community? Can we help them understand that part of succession planning is it looks so much fun to be around that table that other people want to go around that table? So, we did something a little bit different at our awards banquet last December. We announced the whole board. We had them stand up. The incoming president got flowers. We made it sound like this was going to be one of the most exciting things that this new board was doing. And we also made sure that when we had everybody stand up, that what you saw was a really diverse group of folks. So if you can help folks share ideas on how do you make the meetings fun, how do you create this dynamic of energy. So one of the things I've done with a couple of our groups, and I love what we do with the Maryland Recycling Network, for example, their board meetings are generally held at a site that becomes also a field trip. So you want to be on the board because you're going to get to go, for example, to the Coca-Cola plant and see some behind-the-scenes recycling, right? You're going to love going to, we had one in a beautiful green space park where you got a chance to see how parks are doing some recycling. So talk to your folks about making sure that they create exciting dynamic meetings. That means that the members sitting around that table are going to be excited about this, and they're going to hang on. They're going to stay with you in terms of taking an increasingly larger role. One of the things that we've done, which is a sort of an expanded suggestion about this, is we started with PRSA last year, Coffee With series. And our Coffee With series is a small, usually somewhere between 6 to 10, maybe up to 12 folks. They meet at one of our member locations. They have coffee and they have conversation around a particular topic. One of the interesting things is that the first couple of them, along the way, we began getting some of the board members to do this, and we just had one. We have 2 board members that work for an agency, and they just did one. It got them excited to be part of showing off a little bit more about themselves. It gave them an entree to network with some folks. It allowed them to position themselves as someone who cared about community. So it's kind of an offshoot, and it's a very low lift. I mean, you get a couple of people. We post on our website. We've had an incredible success rate with this. So again, the second thing that gets in the way of succession planning is that we suck the air out of the room by not making volunteering exciting. Let's get back to that. The third thing is, and I don't know about you, but every time I have to mention to my board that it's time for us to, be looking at the slate again, it's like, isn't it true that succession planning is hard? I mean, it feels like it's a drudge. So when I've looked across, and I've had a chance to, I've spoken, worked with chapter leaders of some 50 associations over the last number of years that we've had Mariner open. So I've had a chance to see the best and brightest in chapters. I've seen we got it going on some of the time from chapters, and I've seen some struggling. And I would say the best and brightest, largely, succession planning doesn't get a, no, succession planning isn't even, it's kind of like not even a conversation around the table. Do you know why? It's talent development. It's truly less about, I got to put together a slate, and it's about, I am pulling together folks into a community. So a number of years ago, I ran across this incredible thing through a building, one of the building associations, and they were switching, and they were creating, they didn't have nominating chairs anymore. They had talent scouts, and they had talent councils, and one even called it their talent pool. So what they did was and basically they were shifting their membership / non-com teams, smushing them together and creating an engagement and outreach kind of group. And what they did was they were the ones that did the welcome to new members. They did the onboarding. They connected people with different ways to get involved. They changed their whole vernacular. And what really was dynamic about this was that it no longer became this, it came this, this is about membership. This is about membership engagement. And not only that, but people want to be on the talent. They want to be the talent scout. They want to be developing talent. They want to be in the talent pool. They don't necessarily want to be the nominating chair, right? And so this was, when I looked at some of these associations, and I've seen other chapters now picking up on this, and when you see this model, it's just, you just see a vibrancy in the whole leadership dynamic. Now, it's not a real easy thing to do. I understand it's a mind shift. It's understanding the volunteers have shifted. It's tough in some smaller ones, but I will tell you that this is a strategy that I have seen just revitalize organizations. Now, one of the things that we've done with PRSA is we've taken a kind of a hands-off, we got to have a formal slate, and we reach out and find people that want to be on the board and want to be engaged in conversation. That does mean the downside to this, when you start focusing on the pool or the talent, it does mean that that you don't have some of those formal positions like the president-elect. And so every year you're kind of looking around and saying, who's going to carry the ball this year? It does put a little bit more pressure on you, but it also changes the conversation, and you get people more engaged in reaching out and creating the community, which at the chapter level is king. Members can get a lot of content from you guys. They can get national conferences. They can get national networking. What they get at the local level is the local community. And that's part of what we're doing when we switch this. Now, part of doing this is, as I said, let's shift it to the talent of it. But the other part of it is creating a compelling volunteer profile. One of the things that our current president of PRSA has said any number of times, when she finds somebody that's interested in something, she reaches out to them, and she doesn't talk to them about the work. She talks to them about the excitement of being involved in that activity. So she was talking to someone recently who's been on our board, and we're looking at this person just got their APR. It's very exciting, and we want to revitalize that program. And this woman is gung-ho on this, just like our last APR chair was. And so she was talking about not the work of being an APR chair, but this notion of being able to craft a program around something that they were excited about. So can you help your folks not think of the traditional job description, but think of the volunteer profile? Can you help them think instead about the excitement that a volunteer role produces in your life? Now, there was one organization I want to mention, was one of the associations under the FEI umbrella, and I went on to their chapter page, and it was this incredible list of short videos, and they had asked each of their volunteers around their table to do a very short video to answer a specific question. So one person answered it, how do you have time to? And she did this really short clip of, I have time to volunteer because, and she just talked about it. And it was really cool. And someone else talked about the connection to skill building that she needed at her particular job. So this idea of crafting a compelling volunteer profile allows you to sell not the idea that I need a title filled, but that I have an opportunity for you to be part of this really vibrant community. So let's coach them to rethink the nom-com, right, the nominating committee. Let's coach them to think about crafting a compelling volunteer profile. And let's coach them on practicing the ask. I don't know if you guys have had sessions at your chapter development or your chapter leadership programs that are just about practicing the ask. But if you've got a compelling volunteer profile and you have a really cool ask, it's going to work. So let me give you an example. Now, I didn't teach my current president of PRSA on the ask, but she just knows how to ask, right? And she has gotten new people engaged. She's got one for a person who was engaged eons ago and hasn't been engaged recently, got him to chair our conference, and quite frankly, was one of the most successful conferences that we've had. And part of what she does is she reaches out to somebody, she has a casual conversation. The casual conversation turns into, like, what do you like doing? And then she just says something. So with this particular person, she said, we really miss you. We'd love to have you plugged in again. Have you thought about that? And he said, well, actually, things have changed. My son's out of it, he did that kind of conversation. And she said, well, you're really into professional development. Yeah, I think we need to do it right. And she began talking to him, and he had comments and stuff about the conference. And she said, well, why don't you chair the conference? And he went, okay, yeah, let me think about that. Get somebody, one of your chapter leaders who really knows how to do this. Have them do a short video showing an ask, right? Let's really train our chapter leaders on how to ask. And it's not to stand up in front of a room and say, well, we need more people on the board, and I know it's a lot of work, and oh my gosh, even though it's been so much work, I've really enjoyed it. Okay, that's not an ask, right? You know that. Let's get people to practice the ask. Let's do what we need to do in order to help people understand that this is it's a date, right? It's a date. It's asking somebody ask for the date, and you can't fumble through it. So I think that's another really important thing that we have to do. Okay, so when I was talking to the great folks at Bill Highway about doing this and thinking about how, all the different messages that we could say, I was like, okay, there's so much stuff we could say about how we as CRPs can coach our chapters. And I said to myself, okay, well, really, we have to first start by not playing with the old model, right? Secondly, we have to get that energy back. And third, we have to shift the approach from this being hard succession planning to talent development. There are so many other things. And so what I want to do right now is just run through a couple of elements, I think, that make up a different strategy for us. I think that the first thing that makes up a different strategy for us is making succession planning easy, which we've talked a little bit about. But I want to suggest to you that if you take succession planning, if you take this in a larger view and you make it visual, that I think it will help our folks think about it differently. So, not long ago, I created this visual, and I've been sharing it with folks, and the brightness in the faces that I see on a number of chapter volunteers tells me that when you put visual and easy words, it just changes the flavor of the conversation. Now, you don't have to use this one by any means at all, but what I did here was I simply talked about, it's not about succession planning, it's about engaging your volunteer community. It's about bringing a member in, it's connecting them to a person, connecting them to a resource, and connecting them to something that they can do, get their hands dirty, right? And then it's orienting them to, as they come on board, what do you need to know? What are the most important things to know? What are the nice to know things? It's really about making sure that they have all the upfront information. So if it's a board member, it's like, okay, our goal is to get X, Y, and Z done. This is how we're going to know that we've got it done. This is how often we're going to meet. This is our expectations, right? That kind of really easy, incredibly important orientation. And then there's the monitoring, right? It's really making sure that we're touching folks. Now, the person who works in my office with me, who works very closely with the PRSA, what I really love, and like she did this yesterday, was really cool. She sent out this really energized email. It was a touch point for the volunteers. It was, okay, here we are on these couple of things, and this is where we're going, and oh, by the way, here's some exciting news. And that's a way of monitoring, which is reaching out and touching somebody and giving gentle reminders. And then when she gets a question back, that door opens and now she can talk. So we're making it easy for our volunteers to stay on the loop, which of course leads to mentoring. I know that my current president has reached out and talked to each one of the board members throughout the year, just on a one-up basis. Hey, how's it going? What do you like? What don't you like? Where can I help you? And then the reward is really important. So at our board meetings, when we meet face-to-face, most of ours are 1 hour meetings, and then about 5 times a year we meet face-to-face, we give them dinner. That's an immediate reward. And then we reward them with perks throughout the day. And then finally we give them feedback. So succession planning made easy, but then also workshops and training on what they need to practice, the framing, the ask, the follow-through, helping them create a volunteer portal for collecting the interest, because that's one of the ways to open the door, shifting the requirements to embrace new models. And then NVW Promotions. Okay, I wish I had a picture of this. I did have one, but I wasn't able to connect it onto the webinar. Do you guys know what NWV is? I don't know. I'm not seeing any chit chat coming through on my line here, so I'm not sure if you guys have been chattering away in the chat box. But NVW is National Volunteer Week. One of the ways to both thank, reward, and give this feedback loop to your volunteers is also a way to tell people how vibrant volunteering is. And so by that, what I'm talking about is using this week in April to be able to shine the light on volunteering. So RAPS did this incredible job. They have a coffee mug, they've got a book, they've got a little postcard. All this stuff went out to all their volunteers, and they encouraged people with the hashtag to share it. And it created this really fun, dynamic, it's so cool to be a volunteer that kind of percolated, it did percolate through the masses. One of the things about RAPS is that they have had a wonderful uptick in people raising their hand to be volunteers. So taking those kind of promotions, whether you tie it to that National Volunteer Week in April each year, or whether you do it in relationship to your annual meeting, whether you pick your own month. Is there there's a National Nurses Month, for example, or a Community Services Week, or a Radiologist Week, or whatever. Can you highlight the volunteers? How can you promote that? Because part of what we're doing, again, as I said a couple of times during this, is it's really, really about we as CRPs finding the way to get the message to our members that volunteering is cool. And all of these will allow your chapter leaders to have an easy ask at the local level. All right. One final thing I'd like to share, and I'm hoping that there'll be some questions and some chatter because I've run through all of these things pretty quickly. And I think there are probably some of you on the phone here who have just been, you've done this, you've got great ideas to share, and I'd love for us to have some conversation around this, right? So I want to give you my wish list. So when I became when we opened up the Mariner, which is an AMC that focuses on, local, state, regional organizations that have some kind of connection to a national organization, I began to notice from the chapter side of things how sometimes the messaging doesn't support my needs as a volunteer leader at the chapter level. And so I offer this in Humble. I wrote the original blog post back in 2008, and I dusted it off a little bit because it reminds me that sometimes we have to step back and look at the whole picture in order to really support our system at every level, right? So this is my wish list for CRPs, and while I'm not a CRP in a national organization anymore, some of these would be my mantra. And I don't know, and you can type into the chat if you're inclined to type into the chat to talk about a little bit about, whether these are relevant to you or not. But be an active partner recruiting members to serve on the local board. So we sort of talked a little bit about this. And what I'm really talking about, though, to go kind of one step further on this is when you're talking to folks, when you're welcoming or onboarding a new member, or when you're on your show floor and you're talking about them, can you say, hey, have you looked at the chapter? Have you looked at the leadership? Do you know the president? Can I make an introduction for you? Consider asking a national board or committee member to claim their term that rather than finding another national one, maybe they could have a real impact if serving at the local level. I mean, I love, and I use the thing that Wes at RAP showed you, where they talk about the thought leader. Yeah, so I just saw that Cindy had asked a question, what's a CRP? I keep using that. Like, I think that the whole world knows what that is. Thank you, Cindy, for asking the question. CRP is a chapter relations professional. It's somebody who is working, or it's actually component relations professional, but it's somebody who is responsible for working with the component leadership of an organization to help them optimize the experience, optimize the value to the members. So a CRP is shorthand for the component relations professional. Could be the chapter relations professionals, the SIG liaison. But it's that part of your role where you're helping the local leaders really power up how they serve the members. So when someone's finished a term at the national level, it's just oftentimes a lighter lift in some regards at the local level. So can you point them in that direction? Can you keep a list of local state volunteer opportunities to refer members to? Do you have that list on your end? Remember the two that I showed you a little bit before? Both of them list opportunities. Can you just add those to your list? Can you consider adding local volunteer service to your CE requirements? Now, I know that this may be a long shot for some of you, but for PRSA, for example, if you're an APR, judging gets you a CE credit. So one of the things that we do here locally in order to get people to judge our awards is we remind them that if they're APR, they get their credit. So they like that. I know with the CAE that there you can have a certain number of credits based on volunteering. And for the first renewal, I was able to use quite a few because I had been on the Component Relations Section Council, which, by the way, is a component of ASAE, and I was on the Executive Management Section Council. Again, that's a component of. So I was a component volunteer, and I was able to use that. So is there a way? Maybe it exists, and it just isn't promoted. Maybe it doesn't exist, but it could be added. Can you ask your national leaders to recruit colleagues to their organizational local boards? So one of the things that was really cool back when we had a banking association, that the president of the bank, who was on the national board, he took it upon himself to encourage his staff to sit at the local level. Part of it was he had, and he knew the experience of it. But what he did was he not only encouraged folks, but he made it like part of your professional development plan. And I noticed that when I've talked with some other organizations, that's a real powerful way. If you've got a board member to say, hey, are there people that you would like to have some staff development, right, some professional development? Did you have a good experience? Can you encourage someone else? So we've got a head of a local agency here, and every now and then he has pointed to someone and said, hey, I need you, great opportunity, go sit on the PRSA board. So a really cool way of doing that is, tapping at the national level to find somebody at the local level. Can you make it easy for members to invite others to volunteer? So one of the neat things I know that is in, for example, the volunteer manager module for Higher Logic, and I've seen it in some other places where a volunteer opportunity comes along and it says share with someone else or refer someone else. The Higher Logic module, you actually can nominate basically someone else for this role. Can you help your chapter leaders do that? Can you help do that at the national level? Can you make a personal introduction for a current chapter leader to a future leader? Can you begin to be matchmaker, particularly at national conferences? It's a great way of doing it. And then the last one is my wish list. Take care in recruiting for national positions so you don't drain the local talent. One of the issues and this is, I'm going to go a little off here and just simply say one of the things that has been troublesome for us at the local level is that we also have regional boards, and the regional boards have national boards, right? And I can't tell you how many times the regional board has reached down and seen someone on our board and said, hey, you're doing so much well, why don't you come work for the regional board? Or, national says, oh, you're a really great engaged volunteer. Like, will you be on this national task force? I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying understand that if I am trying to build my volunteer muscle at the local level, if I have limited resources, you could be a drain of that local talent. So please be cognizant, please be aware of how that might have an impact. And if you're a good partner with these other things, I'm sure, it'll probably work out just fine. But I just wanted to make that as a comment for you, that was part of my wish list. Okay, so Sarah, I can't see very well the questions. I know a couple of questions have come in. Can you help me with some of the questions that come in so that we can go ahead and open up the dialogue here and get some people talking? And I know we've got a couple minutes, probably about 10, 15 minutes left, and I'd love to be able to talk a little bit with the folks and hear their questions. Wes, did you say that was a great graphic? It's probably Wes from the. Okay, I'm starting. I can't see the other questions. Are the phone lines open, Sarah? Can you let people just go ahead and ask questions? Not too many questions. Okay, great. All right. Well, let me do this. Let me ask you guys a couple of questions. Do any of you have any succession plans that you can share? Do any of you have any suggestions you'd like to add to the conversation that we're having here? Oh, Barb, that's pretty cool that you do not allow the national board leaders to serve on the local level. Once off the national board, they appreciate that is awesome. Thank you, Barb, for sharing that, because I think that us understanding how do we spread the talent is really cool. So you said, how can you build relationships with local to suggest and implement these changes? So, well, here's the thing. I find oftentimes that if we can get a set of chapter leaders who are doing something really interesting, to be able to have them broach the conversation and say, I did this and it worked, is oftentimes the best way to begin to implement some different changes. So it's not unusual. One of the things that we've done with a couple of the chapter leadership conferences, and I think maybe some of you have these leadership conferences, we'll put together a panel of, it'll be innovation or changes or and one of them we're going to be doing and coming up in November is going to be a situation room where we're going to have a couple of different volunteer leaders from different chapters get up. And I'm going to be the moderator. I'm going to moderate this panel, and we're going to take a question and we're going to let each one of them talk about how they've done it differently. So I think that getting many of these things to shift, it starts with finding some volunteer leaders. If you can't find those volunteer leaders, then what you might do is bring in, somebody from the outside to do a session. A webinar is a great way of doing this with, hey, 5 new ideas that we are seeing in chapters across the country. So sometimes your chapter leaders need to hear a different voice. So find that way of doing that. And listen, you all have a great CRP community. Can you do webinars for each other? Like, I'm from a such association and I have chapters and we've done these 5 things. So really consider being able to bring in those additional voices to make that happen. So yeah, Brian, you were wondering, how do you engage locally without overstepping your bounds? So that's a really great question. I'm a chapter exec who would be like, come, please come. And I realize that not all chapter execs are going to be that way. So here's my thought. We know this is a pain point. Why don't you start with if you've got a chapter leader forum, why don't you start a question that says, hey, we're hearing from some volunteer leaders a couple of pain points around this, finding volunteer leaders. Here are some ideas that we've collected. Call me up if you would like to talk more. In other words, put it out there, open the door. Then when the call comes in, offer some ideas and then say, how can I help you further? As soon as you get 3 or 4 of your chapter leaders through these calls saying, I'd love to see this, then you go back out and say, hey, we're going to build this section on the website that's just all about volunteering at the local level because we've heard from 5 of you that it's interesting. Can I have 3 to 7 of you be on a quick up and down task force to decide what to put on this? So take it always like, I've heard this. Is there anybody else with this question? Let's talk personally. Pick up those phones and have these conversations. If you've got a lot of chapter execs and you've got, I would be talking with your chapter exec. Be friends with your chapter exec. I'm working with an organization right now who does an amazing chapter exec meeting. It's just for their chapter execs. They bring them in. They ask them ahead of time, what do you want to talk about? They create the session around the chapter execs. And it's really vibrant and it creates a partnership. If you're an organization that's largely volunteer-based, then really reach out to the volunteer leaders and maybe suggest, hey, when's your next board meeting? Can I just come in by Skype and have a conversation? I think that's going to really allow you to ask them to be of help, to coach them, right, without overstepping the bounds. It's a fine line, and I'm glad that you asked it. And Barb, you were asking, is there a concern about having a national officer recruiting at the local level? Okay, so that's a great, and one of the dynamics here, and I agree that I'm coming from the CRP and the chapter execs, so I know there is some between chapters and national. Sometimes there's some rub. I don't think that there's a concern having a national officer saying to their folks, hey, I want you to get engaged locally. I think there's a problem if the officer says, hey, I want you to get on the board, and then there's assumption that because he said it, they have to put you on the board. That is, to me, the no-no. But to say to somebody, I really want you to do that, contact so-and-so. In other words, be the matchmaker, but give that person approval. One of the things we hear here locally in Maryland is that people don't raise their hand for volunteering is because they don't get or don't perceive they will get permission from their boss. So we had one gal who was really dynamic, but her boss was totally not about it, and she had to do all of her volunteering at night on her own time. She got a new job, and they're like so for it, and she's loving it because she can respond to emails in real time. But the point here is yes, if National is trying to manipulate the board, that's not going to work. But if National is giving employees the right to raise their hand and saying not only is it good, but we suggest it, I think that's where the point I was trying to make. And I think that what we're doing is what I'm sort of suggesting in this conversation here is that as a partner, that you go, if you say to the local group, if you're having trouble, here are 5 or 6 different ways I can help you maybe find some additional people. One way is I can go to the national board and see if there's anybody there who has staff in your area. Another way I can do this is I can actually, if you give me the list of people that you're really looking for, I mean, I can reach out to a couple of folks that we know they're active nationally, that they've come to a meeting or whatever, and I can have a talk with them. So if you're concerned about stepping on this, then why don't you take it from a conversation of, hey, I hear you're having a problem. Here's 5 things I can do for you, and pick the ones that make the most sense and see if that will work. Yes, Barbara says she likes the idea of the elevator speech for the ask. Absolutely, you could do a session. That is a great session at your chapter leaders conference, or maybe do some of you have like a 1 hour or 2 hour get together for chapter leaders that are able to be at a chapter. If they're coming to the conference and maybe you have like an informal gathering for your chapter leaders. You could do a really cool collaborative exercise, get them together, brainstorm, and create the elevator speech for the ask, and then they walk it away. So that could be a really interactive session. Great idea there, Barbara, for getting us thinking about that. Okay, and let's see if there's any other questions coming in. Let's see, knowledge of the local membership. Okay, from Aaron, I see seems to require 2 things. Knowledge of the local membership and extensive. Yes. I'm sorry, guys, I'm reading through here, but how do you build relationship with local leadership to suggest changes? So sort of what we've been talking about a little bit, but let me speak as the chapter exec for a moment and just say that over the years, we have 3 organizations that we manage here, and they're all different, and they all have a different approach to this whole, how do I get volunteer leaders? And I will tell you that there's not one size that fits all. All 3 of them do it differently. With the one chapter, we have had fits and starts, and we went through what I call our dark period, where we could barely get people around the board. So we actually reached out to the national organization, and what they did was they sent down someone from the region and basically told us that we needed to do this, and we needed to do this, and we needed to do this, and we needed to do this. And I remember sitting back and thinking, well, you've got data on members that I don't have. You know people that I don't know. I've laid out in the cards who we know and who we don't know. What we want was for you to come to us and open some doors. That's what we really wanted. So I can tell you from a chapter perspective that if you come to us and you say, what's the burning issue, and you say, well, here are 5 or 6 things, 3 things, 2 things that I can do, I think you're going to find that is a very welcome conversation. If someone the chapter doesn't want it, then fine, step away slowly, still facing them, still smiling, saying that the door is open. But building the relationship between the national and the local organization is really about coming to us with open ears and questions. And okay, I can't do everything for you, but I can do these couple of things. So I would encourage you to reach out to your chapter leaders and say, my job is to be your partner in crime in this, right? What do you need? What's the skill set that you're looking for? What's the help that you're looking for that I can't do it? That I can help you with something. Okay, good, Brian. That half-day event for chapter leaders at the annual conference as a pre-con, that's a great place for building the relationships, having them work on this as some collaborative tools around the ask, having them. So there's a little tool, and if you Bing me, it's on my website. I'm happy to share it with everybody. But it's how to break down big jobs into small jobs and how to create those ad hoc positions. Have them work through that worksheet. Great opportunity for you to get a collaborative conversation. And for the folks that have been asking, how do you build the relationship? When you have an event like that, just a quick pre-con at the annual conference. When you have that begins to build a relationship. So I would not, and it's so funny because I do a number of these, and I don't mention this as self-promotion, although it probably sounds it. I don't like it when someone says, well, can you just come in and do a session? I'm like, no, I'll come in and facilitate a conversation. Because what I think is that what builds the relationship is when you help them have really awesome conversations, so they can learn from each other, and then they view you as a resource and a partner. And then when you want to do some of these things that I'm sort of throwing out there, they're saying, yeah, let's do it now. So help them have good conversations to build that relationship. All right. We are 5 minutes to the hour, and I've been chit-chattering, and you can tell this is something that I enjoy talking about. But what I really want to do is just to thank you guys for being here and see if there is anything else that you guys, any other questions, and let you know that, at the end of the day, I'm always available. We've got a lot of resources at marinermanagement.com, but so does Bill Highway. They have some awesome toolkits and examples, so please do that. And also know that we are actively supporting getting stuff up on the ASA Collaborate. So there you go. But you can reach me on Twitter. You can reach me email. You can even just pick up the phone and talk to me, and I'll be happy to share anything that we've got here. And lastly, but I got to tell you, if you don't, a little plug. If you haven't heard already, Association of Competitive Exchange, a group of CRPs are working with Bill Highway and Mariner to put on the first ever day just about components. It's leveragechapters.com is where you can go, and it's $149, but we're constantly looking to give a break to you guys, so $99 with the code. This is not a Bill Highway Mariner event. This is a community event. We're just facilitating it because remember what I just said? Yeah, it's about facilitating great conversation, and that's what we're going to be doing. So, guys, the hour is done. We have other things we have to do in our busy schedules. Shall we sign off and move on to the other parts of our to-do list? Hopefully, I'll see some of you October 13th. But in any case, let's stay in touch. This has been fun. Feels a little one-sided, but it's been fun. Sarah, running it off to you. Anything else that you have to say, or we should just let these folks get back to work? Sounds like we are good. All right, guys, have fun. Have a great week. Stay in touch. If you can, join us on the 13th.